If you want to learn or are learning how to make games, one piece of advice you hear almost everywhere is do a game jam. Events hosted online or in person where people spend a short period of time making games that often use a theme or other limitation. Some of these game jams can pull in thousands of people, sometimes annually, and they keep growing in popularity. One of the biggest game jams recently is the GMTK Game Jam, hosted by Game Maker's Toolkit, which in 2025 raked in nearly 10,000 games made in just 96 hours. I've been making games myself since 2016, and in those 9 years, I've participated in over 20 game jams myself. Some of those games turned out pretty well, others turned out not so well. But I've done a lot of them, and they helped me learn a lot of skills and knowledge that I carry around with me today. Here's everything I learned from game jams, and how they even got me my first job in the games industry. One thing that always seems to be especially true in game development is that there's always something new to learn. There are loads of different ways you can learn too, whether it's a new game mechanic, different art style, other music genre, or just learning to make a game itself. A lot of people use game jams as a way to get into game development for the first time, which is the biggest learning hurdle of all. There are also times people enter a game jam just as an excuse to learn something new. I think I've learned something new with nearly every game jam I've done. Whilst making Built to Sail, the game I made with Dryden for the GMTK Jam 2024, I had my first go at environment art and lighting. Cobbo was myself learning how to make a 3D game for the first Mashup Game Jam. And for last year's Mashup Game Jam, I tried out 3D lighting on 2D sprites for the first time by making my own normal maps. The last game I did, the GMTK Jam 2025, was my first time making a rhythm-based game with Jump Beat. So there's always something new to learn in game jams. And if you think that's not the case, then that's just a lesson you'll have to learn at some point too. When you're participating in a game jam, it's more than likely one with a short time frame. It can range from a few hours to a whole month or more, but regardless you still have a limited amount of time to start and finish a game, and if you're not thinking about the time, it's more than likely going to leave you in a difficult position. When you're thinking of making a game, time should be part of nearly every conversation or decision you have. Whether you're initially thinking of what game to make, any idea you have should be met with the question, can I make this with the time I have? After all, if you've only got a couple of days, you probably shouldn't be making an open world online multiplayer game. You should be fully aware of your own skills and expertise, and should only go with game ideas that you are confident in being able to complete within the time. The last game I did, Jump Beat, it was definitely an ambitious idea, but in retrospect I should have fully asked myself whether 4 days was enough time to make a 3D platformer by myself. Though I was able to make it within the time, it did have a lot of bugs, and I felt the idea was half realised, so I would have been better off choosing a smaller scope, as I would have had the time to polish it up and submit a better game. Management is such an important part of game jams, even if you're just working by yourself. As a follow-up from the last rule, it's one thing to think about how much time you have, and it's another to use that time effectively. After the many game jams I've done, I've realised that one thing I'm not very good at is that I tend to focus a bit too much time on the visuals of a game, often before I even have a solid gameplay loop. It happened with Not Smooth Sailing, the game I made for Ludum Dare 50. I did it again recently with Jump Beat, wasting a good amount of time doing the 3D modelling on the main character. I like to put in effort to do polishing in some areas, and though a bit of polish is nice, it shouldn't come at the detriment to other parts of the game. Also, if you're working with other people, management becomes even more important. Everyone needs to be aware of what needs to be done and who is doing it. If not everyone is on the same page, then it can lead to conflict and can make the game suffer too. I have done a few game jams with other people, and one of the best things you can do is keep up a steady conversation on what you're working on, and to assess what needs to be done next and whether your goalposts need to be shifted. It's okay to change what your game is throughout the jam, as long as you're going back to that question of, can I make this with the time I have? One of the important parts of management is allowing for whatever plan you have to change. It's generally best to have a prototype up and running as soon as possible, so if you need to make changes to the game, you can make them early on and early enough to result for a better output. Probably the best example I have is normal activities for GMTK Jam 2023. Though it's quite an extreme example considering the very large team of people working on it, and I only joined on the third day as a QA tester, but if that team had lacked in any communication or everyone knowing what they needed doing, then there's no way that game would have been made. And the gameplay only came together on the third day, which didn't allow a lot of wiggle room for the gameplay changes. While it can be common to have a small amount of bugs in your game, too many can hinder the actual experience. It's incredibly important that throughout the jam, and most definitely before you submit your game, that you playtest. You'd be surprised at the amount of bugs one can find in your game, so you have to make sure that at least they can't find any that will break the game. I tried to make a dialogue system for my game Colosseum in WoWy Jam 3.0, but if I had playtested it enough, I would have realised that the dialogue system caused so many problems that it would easily break the sequence and flow of the game. Another thing that playtesting can help with is finding the difficulty. If too many people find your game too difficult, they're not going to complete it. You also have to bear in mind that, as a developer, you've likely had countless time playing the game and getting used to whatever control scheme and mechanics you've created. But for people coming across it in a jam, they don't have that practice and the barrier of entry could be too high. Last Level was a game I made for the WoWy Jam 2.0, and I thought I made it at the right difficulty. A lot of feedback was that the game was too hard, or that the checkpoints weren't closer together. And that's because I'd gotten so used to playing the game myself that I wasn't aware that a first time experience would be a lot tougher. So if you're following this lesson, you have to be aware of how the difficulty will be for players as a first time experience. Maybe even ask your friends, family or strangers online for help in playtesting, as they'll help you find the right difficulty as well as highlight any bugs that need fixing. I think sometimes people are a bit scared to do game jams because they're afraid of not getting their game finished and submitted in time, and don't want their time to be wasted. Which is completely valid, since time nowadays feels so valuable that you don't want to misuse it, but that has more to do with how you view game jams. I have definitely failed game jams in the past. Granted, I have been lucky enough not to miss the deadline, but something can really be said for the quality of submissions. I consider Colosseum to be a failure because it was barely playable. I consider Not Smooth Sailing to be a failure because it didn't deliver on what I wanted it to be. And I consider the game I started making for the GMTK Jam 2021 to be a failure because, well, I gave up halfway. Even Glow, the product of the first Brackeys game jam, which was my first ever game jam, is a failure because most people couldn't even get past the first area of the game due to a delta time issue. But everything has to do with how you frame it. Yes, Colosseum was a failure, but in doing it I learnt more about dialogue, sequences, and I worked out a fun pixelated style. Not Smooth Sailing was a failure, but I got to experiment more with that pixel art style and try a 2D player on a moving ship, which was fun. Though this electricity game was a failure, it was my first attempt at a circuit-based system. And you know what actually is quite similar to electric circuits? Train tracks. So I was able to take what I learned from this game into another game, Train Troubles, and much later on, Railway Life. And yes, Glow was a failure, but on the other hand I learnt so much from my first game jam, and if I didn't make the game then I wouldn't have made a video about it, and if I didn't make a video about it I wouldn't have continued making videos on game development, and if I didn't continue, well, you wouldn't be watching this video. If you fail, but that doesn't make you a failure. If anything, game jams are the perfect place to fail because then you haven't lost much time. If I didn't fail, then I wouldn't have learned. And if I didn't learn, then I wouldn't be good at making games, or even be able to make this video. And the last thing I learned, probably the most obvious thing, is how to make a game. It sounds simple, because by doing a game jam, it's literally what you're setting out to do, but it's more important than you think. What you have experienced doing a game jam is the concept planning, the prototyping, the development, the playtesting, the bug fixing, the exporting, the marketing, and presentation of a game. In such a short time, you have gone through the whole development cycle of the game up until release, and you've basically got a taste for what the real thing is like. And if you've made a game, you know that you're capable of making a game. And if you're capable of making a game, what's stopping you? And if you want to get into games, making a game will help build your portfolio, and that's exactly how I got my first job in the games industry. I had a few game jam entries on my portfolio to show that I have made games before. And while the game jam games themselves are not very impressive, it shows that you have made the initiative. It shows that you've created a game. It shows that you've learned how to do so, and it shows that you've submitted it to a public area, allowing for feedback. And having game jams on your portfolio is much better than having nothing. So those are the main lessons I've learned from game jams. If this has inspired you at all to do a game jam, then let me remind you that the Mashup Game Jam is starting this Friday for 7 days, so there's no better time than now to join the jam from the link below. It will be the last game jam I host for a while, so take this opportunity to join, and I'll see you there. If not, then I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.